about this white man named Tarzan, who's king of the jungle. Mom, I thought that the lion was the king of the jungle. So Mom says, when the lion learns to write, we will hear a different story. A variation of this is basically Tales of the Hunt. Until the lion learns to write, Tales of the Hunt will always glorify the hunter. So, history, right? We saw that, in the readings, Ramses, among others, revised history to benefit himself. So, we start with history. With history to a people is like memory to a person. So that's why you will see in the analysis that I often bring, you have to start with a historical analysis of the previous solutions or failures to a problem. History then leads to psychology, which literally means the study of the spirit. But for example, if we basically look at the psychology of Western civilization, Western equals white, and I'll show you about the African American 5 aspects of self. So for example, Western psychology works like this. Let's take Freud. Any psychology students here? Freud's concept of what the human self is. You've heard it perhaps? Okay, forget that Freud was a cocaine addict. You have ego. You heard this? What's next? No psychology students, huh? Okay. Superego. And the id. Okay, that's Western psychology. So Western psychology, besides its roots in Greece, so to speak, starts with Freud. And Freud's concept, basically, one, normal equals middle class white European men, because he's in Germany, right? Those are the normal people. If you're not middle class, educated, white European male, you are abnormal. If you're a woman, you're hysterical. I'm not making this up. This was the worldview. We basically, Western medicine, as pictured by the last century, treated pregnancy as if it were a disease, an illness. Where's the logic in that? The logic is based on the psychology. Okay? So, white. Yeah. Now, if you weren't those, then you had to conform to that. So, Freud's idea was this. Your ego is, you wake up, you're in your body, your ego is basically who you are. Well, who am I? I'm who I am on my driver's license. Okay? 5'7½", 200 pounds, was born on a certain date, yada, yada, yada. Okay? This Mark Harris guy. Woke up. Okay? And then I have a history. I was born on a date certain, I had certain experiences, etc., etc., etc. That's who I am. Boom. Okay? So that's my ego. Identified with the body, physical body, and the things that have happened to the body. My id is my impulses. Okay? So when we hit the term idiot, basically referred to people who we'd call developmentally disabled now, who would, and if you've ever worked in, with folks like that who are developmentally disabled, some of them, in terms of the more extreme cases, will do things that we don't consider to be done in polite society because of their impulse. Id is basically the generator of all your impulses. Hunger, sex, anger, etc., etc. So an idiot was a person that basically expressed all those things without reservation or hesitation. Masturbate in public, fart, belch, etc., things that we don't consider polite, right? So who defines what polite is, right? Society. And so the superego, that super means above, society puts all these pressures on you to conform to what politeness is. And the difference between the id and the ego, basically the superego and the id are basically fighting this war in the ego, according to Freud. And that's what causes neuroses. Okay, so like I'm a guy, and if there's a potted plant, I wouldn't, if I have to go to the bathroom, I wouldn't just walk over and start peeing, right? Because society says that's not cool. So theoretically, then there's a war going on. Well, no, I'll just hold it. Go to the bathroom. Don't fart at the dinner table or in church, right? Do silent but deadly if you do anything. Right? Again, that war between the id and the superego spot in the ego. So Freud then said, okay, you need to talk these hang-ups, these neuroses out to deal with that conflict. So he invented what's called the talking cure. So classically, the patient is lying on the couch and the psychiatrist is trying to stay awake, taking notes, and this is because you weren't breastfed. So, and you're secretly in love with your mother and you want to kill your father, Oedipus complex, etc., etc., etc. So Freudian psychology, again, is based on the ego, the physical person. Hey, well, African psychology don't play that. I'll get into that in a little bit. History, psychology, creative arts, and science. So both the humanities and the sciences. Politics, the distribution and conception of power, and your conception of what power is. So when I talked about the difference between empowerment and domination, that's two different easy ways of conceptualizing power, but there are other forms of power. And sometimes instructing people on different types of power, sometimes just the concept by itself can be a tool. So for example, within this particular framework, we talk about spiritual power. What kind of spiritual power is there? What are our words for spiritual power? That will depend on what culture you're talking about, whether it's African or other forms of spiritual power. But many of our spiritual leaders have also been political. We don't make a distinction, right? The head of the Egyptian government was also the highest priest. They were considered to be divine, a son of God. So boom, they are the epitome of spiritual power, and they lead our troops into battle. So there was no conflict between the spiritual and the political. They were intertwined. Distribution and conception of power. That doesn't necessarily mean that you want, say, Billy Graham as president, whatever. So, spirituality, a relationship to something greater than yourself. Economics, distribution of and access to natural necessary resources, and social organization is a product of culture. So as far as Kawaida, we covered the 7 principles of blackness, 7 products of culture, and 7 levels of action. Individual, informal group, which could be your family, however you consider or define your family, or kinship, people that you have kinship with, blood, spirit, or affinity, or your ball team or whatever. Organization, different types of organizations, and basically in their 20th century form, the Congress of Racial Equality, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the Organization of African American Unity, Black Panthers, US, MOVE Organization, Nation of Islam, were examples of national level organizations within the United States. There are other organizations in other countries. Then institutions, historically black colleges and universities, churches, mosques, synagogues, in African culture and African American culture. The community at large, containing all these other informal groups, organizations, and institutions. The nation. So an example could be in the Western Hemisphere, the first there wasn't a European republic. So as an example, a republic is defined by the dictionary as a large group of people bigger than a community that can militarily defend itself. So it's not a colony. So the first republic that was non-native in the Western Hemisphere was the Republic of Palmares in the Brazilian jungle. Basically formed of ex-slaves who were ex-slaves or Maroons, as well as native nations who were basically defending themselves for 150 years against the Dutch and Portuguese in the jungles of Brazil. Republic of Palmares. And the globe is a level of action as well. All right, so if we think about problem solving, that traditions, when you come up against a problem, traditions can offer general principles which might stand the test of time, but may not offer specific solutions, and your problem might be that you're following those traditions too closely. Innovations may require putting survival needs before, say, the law. As an example, like you want to be free from slavery and slavery is legal, then escaping from slavery is illegal. I'm sorry, we're leaving. Bye, massa. Later. Well, that's illegal. You're stealing yourself. That's the law. That literally is the law. Your property. You're not a person, you're property. No. Sorry. I was a doctor in my own country. You won't even let me read here. Bye. All right? Many pirates, as we will see in the coming weeks, were also escaped slaves. Maroon cities like Palmares usually basically recreated their own laws in resistance to the legal authority, and basically in order to enforce their laws, they had to defend themselves, often with guns and force of arms. So today, we'll basically see in terms of response to problem solving, today's civil rights movements and traditional civil rights movements often involve what Thoreau referred to as civil disobedience. We're going to break the law to make a point. As an example, I think I put this here. you know, and what happens when you incorporate diversity, particularly when diversity is illegal. A few of you have visited my office. I actually collect memorabilia, especially black memorabilia. So there was, so the entrance to my office says colored waiting room. Because once upon a time, well, you know, I may have mentioned this, it was actually illegal for black people to be on the streets of Eugene or rent property in Eugene within the city limits before 1965. Could be subject to arrest if you're on the streets after dark in Eugene and Springfield. So you're protesting that, you're going to be subject to arrest. So sometimes civil disobedience means you've got to break the law to make a larger point, even if it risks death. So what happens when you incorporate diversity? Who gets excluded and on what basis in the process of excluding, of incorporating diversity? Who's doing the defining of what diversity is? Who defines whose civil rights struggle is legitimate or not? Who's included in that or not? Oh, you're not really part of our culture. Really? Where'd you get that idea? So for example, when we look at the law, another course that I took that I incorporated within this one, the psychology of law. And original position basically looks at, in terms of, if you're going to change a law, you got to understand where the law came from. That means understanding the history. What were they thinking? Okay, so in the psychology of law, what is the problem? What's the problem? So I'm going to jump ahead here for a second and just define. Okay, what's the problem with having American citizens who are African American coming to Oregon? What's the problem? Why was the state formed to keep black people out of it? What's wrong with black people? I mean, because you had black people who were coming out here who were already here, who were not slaves. So, you know, the cover story is, oh, we're preventing slavery. We're going to be a free state. And the way that we're going to be a free state is we're going to prevent black people from coming here. How's that again? What's the problem? So you go to people, unless your third eye is developed, you can't read people's minds. So you got to go with what they write, because writing is thinking, right? Samuel Thurston. Here's why you ban black people. And he's right. So Thurston High School, Thurston area of... Thurston was one of the first territorial legislators, and he wrote, the reason we're banning black people is because black people mix with Indians. And because black people have a superior knowledge of white culture than Indians, and because they mix with Indians, they're going to create a mixed race of black Indians who will be smarter in battle, and that'll create revolts against the white people, so that's why we ban black people. I wish I was making that up, because you got frowns. Really? Seriously? No, he really seriously believed that. Okay, so that's why you ban all black people, because a few black people have mixed with Indians? I mean, I'm a black Indian, so okay, I'm the kind of person Samuel Thurston warned you against. All right, so what's the problem? All right, let's make a law, and that solves the problem. What is the problem the law is solving? Is the second part of original position. And then, what unforeseen problems does the law create? Well, okay, you make black people illegal in Oregon, and there's already at least 200 black people in the state. What do you do with them? Do they leave? Do you do mass deportations? I mean, some of them are owning businesses. Some of them are like scouts bringing in mostly white wagon trains. They must be cool. And they're bringing in white wagon trains so that Oregon won't fall into British hands. So they're like pro-America. Why do you want them to leave? What's up? So are you going to make exceptions? How are you going to handle that? Right? So original position. What is the problem? What the problem the law is solving? How does the law solve the problem? And what unforeseen problems does the law create? So, to jump back into commit, the things that I liked about studying Egypt that weren't necessarily in the book, basically when we talked about the 0 point, right? The symbolic, the point, the top of the pyramid, where nothingness, the invisible, becomes all things. And you place yourself at the 0 point. So you can manifest creation. You can be the government. You can be your own ruler. You contain both the unmanifest and the manifest, aligned with the stars while on Earth. Show you this graphic by itself. This is a cross-section of the Great Pyramid. So inside those blocks, so pointing south, you have, in addition to this big block building, you have holes either drilled or designed into the building that align themselves at certain times of the year with certain stars. So that the light shines when it's aligned with this particular star at a particular time and illuminates this room in the middle. We're also there too. This star Kochab and Thuban used to be the North Star at the time these were built. Not Polaris at the time. So you design this massive building to align with certain stars, which means in order to do the building, you have to have astronomy, as well as metallurgy and all the other things to be, because that seems like a lot of effort. You can't use candles. You have to illuminate a building, a secret room in the building with starlight. That's deep. So they're not just simply tombs or religious artifacts based on a keen observation of nature, detailed knowledge of ecosystems, anatomy, astronomy, and mathematics. Deities in the form of animals base their qualities on a detailed study of those animals. Sphinx represents the spiritual dominion over the body. So, for example, pyramids are aligned on a north-south axis. They're passages which are designed to admit the light of celestial objects, particularly the star Sirius. Sirius is actually a trinary star system. But number of stones in the pyramid and their weight are a precise ratio, a fraction of the Earth's weight. And they calculated that. They were a national project built by free people. Archaeological evidence shows there was no prisons. The quarters, the food, the medical care given to the pyramid workers was equal to that of royalty. Because if it were just slaves, well, you just use slaves up. But the archaeological evidence shows that, pyramid building is hard on your back. So they actually saw, when somebody had a worn out back, lower back discs worn out, or a broken bone, the bone was set with a technology similar to those of the royalty, because they had mummies to compare. right? You don't give health care to slaves. You use them up. But if they're workers, they're not slaves. And the slaves are basically being fed, it's not the slaves, the pyramid workers are being fed 2-year-old beef, which I don't know if you've raised cattle, not that I have, but 2-year-old beef means evidence of agriculture. Basically, your hamburgers, if you consume hamburgers, are basically made from cows that, you know, are relatively young and tender. Not calves, not veal, but 2-year-olds. So the archaeological evidence basically shows some equality. Now, there are certain religious groups, particularly Jews, that say, oh, we were enslaved by the Egyptians. Okay. That's not backed up by certain evidence, but I'm not going to argue religious politics. Cheops, the largest pyramid, was faced in white limestone so it would shine in the sun. And excavation shows a diversity of people working on them. Now, when I showed this graphic before, Dendera, basically it was on the Temple of Dendera. It's a 365-day calendar. And I think I got a graphic that will show, yeah, right, 12 months and 365-day year, 12 zodiacal signs, and dynamited by Napoleon off the temple at Dendera. So I think the next graphic, yeah, shows this a little bit more clearly. So you have the scales, Libra, Scorpion, Sagittarius, which is basically a winged centaur. The scorpion's tail, more like a chimera. Capricorn, a ram. Oh, there's Capricorn, excuse me. Pisces, the fish. Taurus, the bull. The twins, male and female. Cancer, the crab, is not a crab, it's a scarab beetle. Etc. Akhenaten. Asante basically talked about, well, he didn't necessarily, he's often credited, Asante will say erroneously, this was in that chapter 5 reading, as he's erroneously assigned the creator of monotheism. Actually, Natarianism is already monotheistic. You just have different parts and different deities that are the same being. What he did essentially is they did sun worship. Not that there wasn't already a worship of the sun, but he in particular felt that the sun was the giver of all life. His wife, Nefertiti. So they're credited with one God and public libraries. Did this? Don't know how that got in there. Ah, here we go. So as a comparison, Kamitian and Greek Pantheon, Amun, Zeus, Ra, sun god, Helios, Ta, Hephaestus. Ta is considered the architect of the universe. He speaks the universe into being by first conceiving of it in his mind and then speaking the word that creates the universe. Nut, sky goddess, Rhea. Geb, the earth god, Kronos. Net, Athena. Khonsu, Heracles. Set, Ares or Typhon. Bast was a cat goddess, black black cat. Artemis, Uwajit, Leto. Isar, Osiris or Hades, Aset, Isis or Demeter, Nebphet, Nephthys, Ampu or Apuat, Anubis, Hetheru, Hathor, Aphrodite, Heru, Horus or Apollo, Jehudi, Thoth or Hermes, Maat, Astrea or Themis, Sekhmet, Nemesis. So, special education. This is a 20th century reading of African spirituality. Soul education. So, in the African American experience, soul is not a theological term. It's a technical term that also talks about a quality. Soul is your connection to the infinite that you experience